Welcome, everyone. This is my best friend Steve, aka Zeus. We have lots of overlaps throughout our history, and a lot of things intersect in ways that you wouldn't necessarily understand. So, we're going to talk about some of those overlaps, some of our shared why, how we entered this space as a duo, and talk about some different ventures that we're running into. So, Steve and I met since 2017, or in 2017, we met in the music scene. And he also got me into jujitsu as well too. So we'll talk about our business overlaps with that subject. But Steve, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us your story, and let's jump into this.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on. Like you said, we've known each other since 2017, and he's been my best friend pretty much. I mean, I think we met, and then we kept in close contact, but then it was maybe 2018 or 2019 probably when we after I got back from Korea when we really started hanging out a lot.
Mm,
But yeah, so I mean, for me, the space getting into the space all kind of starts back with how I grew up. I grew up without, much financial education through my life. It was very poverty mindset, very spend the money as soon as it's in the account because if you don't, we might not have it. So I grew up kind of with that leading into me joining the military when I was 19 years old, and that was kind of my first education and anything outside of that mindset. And, that just led me down a path and a trajectory of just wanting to learn everything I possibly could about finances, about how I can, break the generational patterns that I grew up in and just trying to take in absolutely as much new information and knowledge as I can so that I can share with other people. And it's just for me, that stems from really just growing up without having anybody to lean on for that.
mm,
And that's been kind of my driving force behind like as I saw what, infinite banking and what whole life did in my life as just an asset and as something that could secure me and set me on a just a better trajectory, more access to capital, more ability to deploy things, and more opportunities. Because as you have and as you know, like when you have access to funds, you have opportunity. And when I saw that kind of developing in my life, to me, that really just it ignited another. Like I've always been a teacher, I'm a personal trainer, and I've coached most of my life. I was, in the military. I was often leading, and up until now, I've always loved teaching jujitsu, and it's always been a passion. Like you said, we kind of share that passion in our lives. And when I discovered how much this helped me and how much it helped my financial situation and my ability to believe that I can break those generational curses in my life, that's what really sparked me to be like, I need to share this.
mhm. Yeah, we share a lot of that. Let's go back in time a little bit, give a little bit more overlaps on our story, because you mentioned the
Yeah, yeah.
military too. That was an intersection. So me and Steve, of all places, met in the music scene at EDC in
Yeah.
2017. So that is a weird overlap, but that was, I mean, still is like a big part of my life, the rave culture and everything, and for what's that done for me. So we met at EDC. We're hanging out the whole weekend and had a great time.
We
And
both had hair
then,
back then.
yeah, we both had hair. And as we were walking out of the festival, we figured out that we were both in service together. So that was like a hey, what the hell? Like we didn't talk about this the whole weekend. And just dropped on it. And then we were going to a similar festival over in Washington. I think it was a weekend or two after that. And it was at that point that we started to really become friends. But he left to Korea, and then I went to Chicago slash Missouri to continue on my training and military pathway. So we always would make an effort to see each other, maybe like once every month or so, with the exception of you being in Korea. But we had this vision that we shared. We wanted to really give back. Wealth with purpose is a very big thing that we are both a part of. And to kind of shape the vision that we had before, we were going to do more of a brick and mortar type style jiu-jitsu facility. So we were going to be co-owners. That was the initial kind of iteration, if you will, of making this facility. And then, we would be coaches out of there. Steve is about to get his black belt here in a few months, and then I'm a brown belt as well too. But we were going to make this facility, but then as we realized and kind of increased our financial capabilities and literacy and got clear on what we wanted to do and when we wanted to get there, that brick and mortar facility, just being the owners and teaching, really wasn't in alignment. So, but when we started to both discover some of these infinite banking techniques and really increasing our financial competency, that's when it more transitioned into the Rockefeller type application, a Rockefeller method type application, and we could get into what that looks like. But that is, how we cross paths and how we continue to follow a similar path to each other. But I wanted to ask you, military specifically. So I know when I was always interfacing, even with, I was platoon leader and then a captain as well too. So I would always seek mentorship from, battalion commanders, brigade commanders, and everything. And the advice that I got was typically the same: just max out your PSP, max out your Roth IRA, and any excess capital, store that in bonds or high yield savings account. That's essentially what I did. And I put away about 50 to 70% of my income per year. But that's something that we haven't talked on. So what did you learn on the NCO side when you were in the Air Force about money? Is that something that came up at all?
So it's funny it's funny the parallels there, because we've talked about it before, how you in at West Point you had some financial education. I mean, in comparison to let's say traditional college route, you were kind of forced into classes for financial education, which I always found interesting. Um, for me, they give you they don't give you much when you come in. It was mostly seeking mentorship within the military. Like, I actually didn't even realize that the TSP existed when I started. They didn't really,
Mhm.
they talk about it in basic training, but you're like going through so much different things at that time. Your emotions are high, so you don't really, you just kind of do whatever they say. I think that's when I signed up for the Montgomery GI Bill as well, which is
Mhm.
basically useless because I used the post 9/11, so I paid for it for nothing. So they just tell you to do it at some point during basic, and I was like, okay, sounds good. Um, but so fast forward, I want to say it was on a deployment. You know, when you're deployed, you spend 12 hours a day with the same people. You're kind of, especially in my position, I was an aircraft maintainer. So when our aircraft went in the air, I was maintaining an aircraft that spent 12 hours in the air. So we pretty much, you were either launching it or catching it, and that was a small portion of your day. So the rest of the time, you're just there in case something happens. So we're always talking, and somebody starts to inform me about, like, just really what a Roth is. I had no idea at the time. This was 20, I want to say it was 2015 when I was deployed, and I didn't know what the Roth section of the TSP was. So I think that was when I switched out there in that deployment, was when I switched to the Roth, because I had no idea. And fast forward, I was working in Korea actually, and that's where I had an NCO that I worked directly under, and I worked as a resource advisor for the unit. And so my job was to approve purchase requests, to push things through to contracting, and to buy things for different units based on our funding. And so that was its own personal lesson, just kind of being in charge of relatively the finances of an entire squadron in Korea. So that was my first like real confrontation with what I wasn't doing in my financial life, and just like being more intentional about what I'm purchasing, and like really justifying the purchases, like I had to make people do all the time. And it kind of put me in front of thinking like, oh, how often do I actually justify my own purchases and think about where I'm putting my money, more than just dump it into a TSB. have my money in here, put my money over here. And like up until that point, I had just put money on the TSP. And then I think at some point in that time, you actually helped me to set up uh, the stock accounts that I ended up investing in an individual brokerage account and a few other things. So you have actually been a really big player in my own financial journey since probably 2017, I think was when we first started really going back and
Mhm.
forth on it right after EDC. So
Yeah. And I'll pause there. This isn't an attack on low cost index funds, I find one of the major issues is strategies are tend to not be in alignment with goals. A lot of people have a vision of passive income. I define that as when your passive income surpasses your expenses. That may equal financial freedom, what many people call. But the issue that I find time and time again, and that I ran into and that you ran into as well too, is the strategy was not matching the goals. We were just having capital decaying in bonds or high yield savings account. And then we were deferring the passive income game until you're at least 59 and a half or past that in terms of retirement accounts. So when you get clear and and this isn't an attack on low cost index funds. That's great. But for my issue, and I feel like what your issue too was, and a lot of people have, is over allocation. Getting those allocations in alignment with the goals will help make things come into fruition way faster. So that's just I wanted to throw that out there. Like I still invest in low cost index funds. That's a great way. But personally, I moved from about 80 to 90% of my allocations per month to now it's about 15 to 20% of my allocations per month because I can't control what the stock market does. I can't control COVID 2.0 or if we invade Iran next week. Those are real things that could happen. And if I'm trying to apply leverage, let's say from my stock portfolio, and some of those things happen and I have loans out, like what the hell does that do to my holdings? What does that do to my capability to scale and reach my vision? It's not in alignment. It doesn't make sense. But the issue is we are taught that certain pathway that tends to be general advice. But when you zoom out even further and start to get a financial education with some of these books over here, and maybe a book like The Pirates of Manhattan 2 by James Dyke, which you have over at your house, you start to realize that the same corporations that own education and media are the same corporations that own the mutual funds telling you to invest in mutual funds. So it's just this whole mix. And again, it's not an attack on low cost index funds. It is a discussion on getting your strategy in alignment with your goals.
yeah, I think that's super valuable because we all hear of the traditional route. Like I said, we were both told going through the military, like dump your money in TSP, have bonds, and that was we both had greater ambition to be in control of our lives more, to be able to have more optionality in our lives, to have the option of working a W-2 job if we want to or not. Like I personally I don't work a W-2 since the military. Well, no, I did work for a little bit, but I don't work a W-2, and it's because I put an effort into building businesses, but the other thing of it is I've created a system that works for that, for me to have that ability.
Mhm.
Right? And that's like what you're saying is if I had stuck to just investing in stocks or in just low cost index funds and bonds and just having all my money in my high yield waiting for the next thing I was planning on buying, whether it be real estate or whatever, I wouldn't be in a situation where I can live in alignment with my actual goals and in alignment with things that I actually want to do in my life.
Mhm.
Right? Like working a regular W-2 job when that's not what I want. That's not what I desire. And that's not what I've been working towards.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely, man. I don't want to put you on a weird spot or anything. It's just two guys dicking around right now. But you mentioned, your background, not having anyone to really look up to. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? Like, what was going on and how did you overcome that as you were experiencing that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind sharing. I just actually shared it in my podcast episode that I released today. So, really, I started off, dad wasn't in the picture, and early years, my mom was, you know, uh, recovering alcoholic, different substances, and it was just living a lot of the time living in different places, and then she ended up getting married to my little brother's dad's, but he was very emotionally unavailable to me, like as in didn't really acknowledge me as a person in the household. And so what really overcame that for me was really when I had my brothers came into the picture. Because I mean, as a young kid, it wasn't anything. I was just living like, I mean, I just can't remember specifics on like what changed for me then, but I do remember that once my brothers were introduced to the picture, it became like I became driven to be something for them, which was
Mhm.
a big part of my even me joining the military was, I was just living in my town, working at Lowe's and Buffalo Wild Wings at the time, and I was like, I need to do something more because I have two little brothers who are looking up to me because their dad ended up exiting the picture as well. And then, my mom was in and out of the hospital for different mental health reasons and, different reasons tied to some of her substances. And a lot of a lot of different role models in our lives. Like I'm not saying we didn't have people. I had, my uncle, I had my aunt. They were great people in our lives. We had a lot of different um, I had coaches. That was a big part of what made me fall so in love with sports was just being it was honestly being around men who were like I was able to look up to.
Mhm.
And so putting myself in sports and into competition early, I was competitive in swimming from like the time I could walk until I don't know, I was probably 9 or 10, and then kind of progressively got more intense with the sports as time
Mhm.
went on. I ended up playing like soccer and then football and then wrestling and then boxing and then, now I took it back a little bit with jujitsu,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, just sports. I mean, that's the where a lot of the passion for passing that on as well comes from, is because for me, having a competitive outlet and team, having a team, having a community, having people around me that could pull me forward and that I could lean on really helped me with a lot of the different struggles when I was younger.
Mhm. Did you have anyone in particular that really helped you out? So you mentioned different coaches, and then I know you started jiu-jitsu earlier because you wanted to be an MMA fighter starting out,
Yeah.
and then transitioned to more jiu-jitsu later on, but there was a break in there. So was it the jiu-jitsu side later that really started to compound things, or was it your younger coaches? Tell me a little bit more about like who helped shape you and like who specifically helped shape things up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So who started the train was my coach Dave Hammock out of Missouri. He I was boxing with him, and then he kind of started allowing me to teach classes, teach kids. Money problems happened, and he was helping me out, and so it kind of led me to be, excuse me, it kind of led me to fall in love and find that passion for coaching. And then fast forward, um, when I stepped into jujitsu, when I stepped into like back into jujitsu after years of competing in other things, Jiu-Jitsu was Jiu-Jitsu becomes a very large piece of your life if you let it. It kind of can take over. And for me, not that it took over, but it gave me something that I could be all in on, that I could just focus and I could give my 100% on, and I could show up no matter what. And it just taught me to just be one, you have absolute presence on the mat. When you step on, you're there and nothing else is going on. Right? total presence, because when somebody else is trying to kill you, is what your mind thinks, you can't really focus on those external problems that are happening, right? So that gave me it's a sense of a meditation if you allow it to be.
Mhm.
And that accompanied with like quickly becoming a coach in jiu-jitsu, because I went to Korea and I had just gotten my blue belt, and it was me and one other blue belt when we first started.
Mhm.
And so we were coaching a lot, and he was more busy at work than I was. So I was always available for the time. So I coached a lot of classes as an early blue belt. So I was reaching out to different people in the space. Shout out to Kemp Peters. He actually sent me a lot of different breakdowns and things while I was in Korea to help me out.
Mhm.
But I would teach off of that kind of stuff and just reaching
Yeah.
out to people on Instagram. And yeah, so that kind of that gave me that thing to go all in on, and led me to, and that's kind of where I've built a piece of a big subset of what I focus on in my business, is like financial fitness and why it relates to fitness,
Mhm.
right? And because fitness is such a large passion in my life, but I've always noticed that you know, I can help somebody get in shape, but there's other pillars in life that have to be in place, right? I can't really mess with the relationship much, but I can help them be healthy, and I can help with their finances now, right? I can help people like see, places if they'll allow it, right? Because we were speaking about it before, but sometimes, people are set in their ways. We've both been there.
Mhm.
And that's the one thing that I hope is like just across the board, people would allow themselves to learn something new, right?
Yeah.
Because way too often we think that now that we've learned that that's it, that's as far as it goes. Like there's so much more that can be learned, and that can completely change the way you look at something if you take the time to actually dive in and learn it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what was so valuable with the IBC space for me, was once I really learned it, I was like, I mean, I continue learning more every day, and every time I learn something new, I'm just more excited about the things that I can do in my life
Mhm.
and for my clients. So,
Yeah. It's kind of
long
like
answer.
no, all good. The I adjacent financial education to almost like the art of jiu-jitsu too. I always describe like getting your black belt is just where the iceberg meets the water surface. And the game is who could touch the bottom of the iceberg, and no one has ever done that before. So black belt is just really like the starting point. And where I was going with that is there's so many, you could have your mind blown. Like you think you have things figured out. It's like, okay, I have the market figured out or have all my different accounts. Like this is really working well for me. And then someone comes, or, so you stumble upon someone and just have your mind completely blown. That happens in jujitsu too, like you're a black belt, I'm a brown belt. Sometimes I think I have something figured out, and then I just step on the mat and get completely humbled with someone that could just do a backflip around you. So the hole or the waters go so deep in the world of financial education, and I think that's worth mentioning. Um, we went through some different paths as we were talking and everything. I wanted to go a little bit more on mentorship and really kind of like the lack of mentorship that a lot of men are having right now. I see that as a critical issue. I think if you look at the intersections, all the different problems that are happening right now in our space, it could kind of all be tied back to broken homes. And there's an argument that it may be broken men too, not being able to communicate effectively, not having the emotional intelligence. If you don't have those mentors during those critical years, there can be negative things that are going to come off of that. This isn't like, but everyone's dealt a hand of cards, right? I don't want to put all the fault on parents and everything. Like you do have individual responsibility too, but you can remove a lot of headaches with just being present. And with everything I'm doing on the estate planning and building assets and whatnot, and you see some of those players like, okay, yeah, cool, they accumulated, a couple 7 8 figure businesses, but you look at what they're doing, you look at how they're treating women, you look at how they're treating their kids. It's just like you're a piece of shit. Like I don't, that's not wealth to me. Wealth isn't just money. Wealth is more than that. Wealth is, are you a good person across multiple different pillars? That is true wealth to me. And I think it's critically short in present times, especially with men, and maybe even a subset potentially more inside the financial industries.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, you see it way too often. And it's like you said, I think it is the big problem is people fall into, they either they come from a broken home and or they grow up with, maybe they have a parent, but they're not emotionally available, right? So
Mhm,
then they go out and they have to seek some kind of emotional validation outside of that. And for some people, that's building a really large amount of money, but they still haven't filled that void. And so they then turn around and they fill that void with negative relationships, with disrespect towards women or towards anybody really, with just poor behavior choices. And that was actually a big part of why we had the men's group, was because, we found that mental health in general, but especially with men, we have so many people that we have surface level relationships with, but we don't ever really want to go deeper with. We don't ever
mhm,
really want to talk about what's actually eating at us,
mhm,
what's actually the problems in our lives. And, that just being able to do that, I feel would solve a lot of problems in a lot of people's lives, including like if you start, you in the military, they teach us about the pillars of health, right? And to be, if you start solving specifically like things that affect you mentally, right? And maybe that's like, your emotional states. Maybe you go to therapy, maybe you join a men's group, maybe you do whatever, or maybe you start solving the money problems in your lives that could be causing you the anxiety that you feel at home because you don't want to have the conversation with, your wife about what's going on with the finances. And if you start solving these issues, then, you know, and it does take getting down to the root. It takes acknowledging that, that's why I'm trying to lean into acknowledging like the way that I grew up because I can't just, it's part of my story, right? I grew
mhm,
up that way, but it didn't have to define me forever.
mhm,
And that's really a big part of what I'm trying to lean into is that I plan on changing that trajectory that the Benton name was going. I plan on, making it new. And that is really my bigger why of it all
mhm,
is because I don't want people to have to look back and be like, oh man, there's another generation of that family,
mhm,
just doing following the same paths. But it takes somebody to do it, and right, anybody can. Like you mentioned it. It's like somebody can be somebody like at a certain level. We do have to take personal responsibility, and that's what I would kind of say is, anybody can take personal responsibility, whether it be the money, the going to seeking therapy for mental health problems or anything like that, or just, working on your personal relationships or whatever it is. But just you do have to take a level of accountability and start stepping into those spaces and figuring it out.
yeah, yeah. There's a balance game there, and I'm not even really sure like what the optimal split is. But like, yes, there is individual responsibility, but also your upbringing matters, of course, right? And it doesn't matter. Um, Everyone's dealt a hand of cards, right? But are you going to make that card your entire, what you're dealt your entire story, or are you going to do something about it? Of course, there's certain situations where the upbringing is just so jacked up. So when someone goes down a negative path, like it makes sense. There's almost like no way that he could have, or he or she could have, pulled himself out of that. But there's a split there, there is a split between nature and versus nurture versus, if you will. You mentioned being that person to overcome any type of family issues and really becoming a good person. We talked about wealth and what that actually means. I think that's even just being a good person, being a good man is more important than accumulating millions and billions or whatever dollars, you know? I find that more important. And as I've become older, I've figured out how few good men are out there across all pillars. Like, think about the people that you know. Like, how many people are doing it actually right across all those different pillars? And like, going into my deeper why a little bit too, like, this is a transformational process to make me a better human so I could help other humans, you know?
100%, man. I mean, that's all similar to my mission statement. My mission statement is to relentlessly pursue growth and knowledge so I can share it with others.
Mm,
And it's it's not like I just want I want to become the best version. That's why I want to relentlessly pursue growth. I want to become the best possible version of myself. But if I like knowledge that dies with us is just lost, right? Knowledge that dies with us is lost, and growth, it's selfish if you don't share the things that help you grow. Right?
mm,
That's at least for me, that's where I see it. I mean, I don't think that everybody has to be out there teaching, like that's not what I'm saying, but I think that I personally want, like you said, I want to become the best iteration of myself, and constantly I want to constantly evolve so I can continue to help the people around me because I love and I find a great deal of joy from helping somebody, whether it be real like learning something new or realizing something that maybe they didn't see before, and just those moments are very powerful, and that's why I love coaching and teaching so much.
mhm. We we talked a little bit about going down those negative paths as well too. Like, I'll kind of open up and share a little bit of my experience. I know we've both talked about this before, but everyone's chasing something, right? You see it time and time again. It tends to be what I've noticed. People are chasing validation, some type of security, and it all goes back to a lack of love, whether that's from other people or from themselves. Um, so that tends to be a lot of the core issue. Like, I've experienced that, and this is what business ownership has opened this up for me too, you know, because yes, I have this vision of helping out jujitsu communities and the disabled communities with what I'm doing and everything. But also there's a side of me that is pushing so hard just to show that I am capable of doing this. I am chasing this feeling of validation instead of just giving that to myself up front. And that stems, you know, from a fear of failure. Fear of failure is tied to need for success, aka need for validation and love. And sometimes I push so hard, you know, going to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning continuously to receive that validation instead of just giving myself that validation from the start. And, you know, we talked about that iceberg analogy and continually figuring things out. This self-love concept is something that I thought I had figured out to a high degree, but there's just so many different levels to it, you know. This is a part of my journey. I basically had a 9 year self-improvement um shaping, going from someone that I was not proud of to a man that I could say and look in the mirror and say, I am proud of that. You know, I am proud of myself now, which is a big thing to say for me, considering where I came from. But, you know, I thought I had that self-love concept figured out, but it was another angle, another mirror put in my face that I had to realize, like, hey, this will be a lot easier if I just give myself a little space and a little bit of love.
That's awesome, man. I also want to say that I'm proud of you too,
Mhm.
because I've watched you grow over the last, almost 10 years, and you've had an amazing growth journey, and it's super awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And let's transition this and talk more on why with that, you know. This what I'm doing on social media, dude, I got no fucking background in this shit. I'm a former army officer. I love jujitsu and yoga and I love music too. Like, I really have no like shape or knowledge on how to do this the right way. But me and you both share a very cool why, tying this back to what we were doing opening up our brick and mortar jiu-jitsu facility, this goes way, way deeper than that. So tell me a little bit more about your why. You mentioned becoming the best vision of yourself, improving the direction your family name was going, but what's the greater cause too? Tell me more about how you want to help other people.
Yeah, so I mean, we both kind of shared, like you said, you shared before. We developed from wanting to open a brick and mortar studio, a brick and mortar. It started off jujitsu school, then it was going to be jujitsu recovery slash everything place, and then we realized that we could do that, but how much more people can we serve if we can teach people the opening side of it and teach people how to actually get that going and share, those lessons and ways. And now tying this into it, tying IBC and tying, becoming your own banking system into it, it opens up those doors even more into like how we can teach people how they can fund their own systems, how they can fund their own school essentially as profits come in, they can recapture those money into their own system and create, the ability to probably eventually leverage it to open school number two or to expand their own, you know, maybe they want to expand their school, maybe they want to upgrade the mats, doesn't matter. But as the like adding that into the scope of what we had already intended is it just matches up so well with being able to teach people like here's how you can write curriculum for jiu-jitsu. Like, both of us have experience with writing curriculum for different classes and things. Here's how you can, you know, procure the different items you need for opening a school, whether it be mats, whether it be different things like that. Cleaning supplies, whatever. But basically what I'm trying to say is like you put it all into a package that allows somebody, like my vision is to be able to step in and help somebody in an underserved community, whether that be like where I grew up, where, I have friends living, I have people like just in communities that don't have the opportunity to just have these schools, have jujitsu schools in them, be able to step in there and be like, look, I have a package that's like, you can, I'm going to teach you everything there is about it. And ideally, in my vision is this is a nonprofit, so we can do this without actually like charging them, and
Mhm.
they're able to like have these skills and these abilities to open a martial arts school in their community. And that ties back to, like I told you, being in jiu-jitsu and being in boxing and MMA and wrestling when I was young. It truly like took me away from an environment that would have probably turned me into a not good person, right? And spending a lot of time not in that environment was good for me. And so
Mhm.
participating, like I would run to the gym and I would spend the rest of the day after school at my boxing was my like MMA gym school. And I would run there and stay there pretty much until they closed at like 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then
Mhm.
I would walk home or get a ride almost every day. And that like it's something I want because I see the value it had in my life. And I
Mhm.
want that, and that's down the line, but that's where I'm developing. Those are the things that I'm putting in place, these financial systems, so I can create the ability to invest and to do these philanthropic visions of being able to truly like help somebody from the ground up start a school, whether it be just martial arts in general, but jujitsu would be like obviously where I would feel the most comfortable, but just help people with getting that ball rolling and be able to just provide for their community.
Yeah, it's when you look at what we're doing, we're trying to give the gift of jujitsu in an efficient manner. We talked about some of the core issues that we're facing as a whole society can kind of be traced back to broken families. Well, if you could repair individuals, then you could start to break that whole cycle. Well, what's a good way to repair the individual? You look at martial arts as a vehicle for self improvement. It's not going to work for everyone, but it certainly worked for me and you. This has been a great positive feedback loop that I experienced between jujitsu and the other pillars of my life. I improve in one area, makes me better. I go improve in the other areas, makes me better. And you're just continually doing this positive feedback loop. And jujitsu is kind of the core of that. And it ties into different pillars of life. But well, yeah, when you look at what we're doing, we're trying to give this gift of self-improvement to people in an efficient manner because I kind of adjacent, jujitsu teachers to regular teachers as well, too. A lot of people, if you're going to take that leap to go open up your own gym, it could be very trying sometimes, and you're really not in it for the money. You're in it for the purpose because you want to actually make an impact. For you wanting to make an impact, you shouldn't, I feel personally, you shouldn't be penny pitching. That whole concept sucks. I feel like teachers should be one of the most sought after and cared for roles, but they're not. And I want, and I know you want to as well too, to help fix some of those problems. And let's kind of dive in a little bit and explain how we could do this. You mentioned a nonprofit. I'll kind of briefly explain the Rockefeller method and explain another tie-in to how this could look. So, with me and Steve are both in the insurance game using specifically designed insurance to go buy other assets. Well, those insurance policies all have a death benefit. Those death benefits can all be put inside of a trust in which you control the rules and regulations on. That is the Rockefeller method in a nutshell. So you could have this pool of capital that essentially becomes a privatized bank, which you control the regulations on. I.e., if I want, let's say we have someone from really jacked up background and they want to open up their own gym, well, they could take from my privatized bank at a 0% loan, a 1% loan, or in the form of grant money, perhaps, and they could go get to their why quicker. And on top of that, you could use the living benefits of insurance, the capabilities that are baked inside these policies to go build more assets now and continue to give while you're living. And then it's just compounded when you graduate and die.
I mean, I don't think I could say it any better than that. I mean, that's the book, What Would the Rockefellers Do? I mean, when you capture that system, when you capture those death benefits inside that system, and then you set it to buy more insurance after you pass away, it's a perpetual process of just a ever growing system because with those specific policies, with specifically designed policies, they are going to compound. Like you are guaranteeing compounding. And even when you're using the money, like as you mentioned, using the money to go buy assets now, you are still compounding inside of that system. You're not depleting the system. The system remains intact. But you're still able to go use that money. And so you're creating you're funding the philanthropic vision, you're creating the system that will be the vision, but you're not taking away from your ability to use and grow in the moment. I just think that's super powerful.
Yeah. And I think we're in a time and place too where these strategies are starting to gain traction again. Trust in corporations and the government is at an all-time low. You could flip on the news and social media. The cat's out of the bag, man. We all know what's going on. We all know are starting to understand the interconnectedness of all these different systems. You might call it the asset management industrial complex. It's connected to the military industrial complex. We could look at what the Sadler family is doing with pharmaceuticals. It all ties back together. And like we talked about before, the same corporations that own these mutual funds are the same corporations that own education and media. In fact, there was deliberate marketing against these policies that me and Steve are talking about in the 1980s. So you have to kind of analyze. I made a video about this, about what happened from the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 to our present times now. Once you start to understand the steps and the different processes that happen in between, that timeline, things will become very apparent. And like we said, there was deliberate marketing against these policies to push people to invest in these mutual funds. So it's just this interconnected system. And, that ties into a little bit of my greater why too, and why I'm so passionate about this. I struggled a lot with nihilism. I started to see these interconnected systems when I was a cadet at West Point. And it was at the time when I was about to sign 5 years of my life away to go be an active duty officer after the academy. So I was running into this really like identity crisis because I grew up very patriotic, kind of similar to you, bled red, white, and blue, if you will. Saw things as very black and white. America's in the right position. We are doing the right things. And as I started to really increase my education, I realized that things are very gray. And that put me in a really tough spot. And there was some other compounding issues too that were going on. But I got really nihilistic and it spiraled down to some more darker places. But this all kind of ties into together with the concept that we're having are the discussions that we're having around finance. The asset management system is tied to this entire operation. So that is why I'm so passionate about this. But there are other ways. I felt like I couldn't make a change. That's what pushed me so down into the hole. I saw these systems and I was like, fuck, like, screw it, man. I'm not able to make any change. But I feel like with what we're doing, you can make a change and you can be that person in your family, like you were talking about, to step up to the plate. And, I'm not trying to be alarmist right now, but I think we are in a time and place in history right here, right now, where people are going to have to step up to the plate and actually do something to help people. Corporations and governments are not going to save us. And truly, me and you were both in the military for, potentially a decade or more. We are in a time and place right now where we need to step up to the plate, or our conceptualization of our society may not be a thing here in the next 10 to 20 years. I truly believe that. Again, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but goddamn, it is time for people to step up to the plate and actually start helping people. And you can do that in a very efficient way by increasing your financial literacy and your education. Get educated. It's not that complicated. This isn't me trying to punch you in the gut, but it's not rocket science. Once you understand money, it'll make your conceptualization of this entire system way easier and you can make a change. And that is one of the major reasons why I'm pushing this out there as well, too.
Yeah, that's super strong. I mean, that exactly what you said is, you know, we are not on the current trajectory that we are on. We Let's just say it won't end up well, especially if you aren't prepared, right? If and that's, another slept on value of using the systems that we're talking about, using dividend paying whole life, is that it's a contract, right? You're not beholden to the system that can change the rules, print money, do these different backdoor accounting tricks to create money out of nothing, loan money to people without any kind of due diligence and without any kind of vote, and just create an invisible tax that we all have to live with in inflation without our say really in any of it. Like, I would rather have my money in a place where it is contractually guaranteed to be at a level, and I don't have to worry because there is a contract that says that this is, and they've already done this for 2 centuries,
Mhm.
right? They've already held these contracts without ever having a lapse for 2 centuries. Like, I want that more than I want to trust my money in the hands of blatantly the same idiots who have ran the country into the ground for the past, 100 years.
Yeah. Some of these companies have paid dividends through the Civil War, World War One, and World War Two. That if you're looking for safety, control, and guarantees, there is no argument that these policies are the gold standard. And yes, they do have a lower rate of return inside the policy, but that's that trap of just looking at rate of returns. It's not taking into account opportunity costs. You use these policies as a bank to go buy more assets. And then you could use the capabilities of those different assets to scale in addition. And you are applying leverage. You are using life insurance company money with this, which is cheap and flexible debt, to go buy other assets while your money remains intact and continues to grow tax free. These policies are a tax shelter. So let's end it there. That was an hour. Steve, I love you, buddy. But in the
Well,
next
one,
one, oh, please.
let me just throw one more quick thing at the end of that is
Yeah.
just, you have to remember that we live in a boom and bust system, and that the people who have access to money when we hit those down cycles are the people who are going to be winners, right?
Yep.
And so having access to money truthfully should be your main intent, in my opinion, should be your main attention. That is my opinion, but having access to money is one of the most important things in my life for when these opportunities come, as you mentioned, opportunity funds. So that's, I just want to throw that in.
Yeah, millionaires are made in recessions and the depressions. But we'll keep on doing this, man. We'll probably do like an episode a month. But I appreciate your time. I love you, man. This has been a pretty
Love you
cool
too,
journey
bro.
that we're. He smiles. It's been a cool journey that we've been a part of. We have so many intersections, and really looking forward to just kind of sharing our story and doing more of these. This is fun.
Yeah, this was awesome, man. I appreciate you having me on. Like I said, I love you, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one.